Well, what's happening in Ireland? The riots, the anti-immigration sentiments, the new hate speech censorship attempts, and are the Irish now just a bunch of far-right bigots? Or is there something else, perhaps legitimate, about their grievances? Let's first do a quick recap of the recent events, which have been dubbed the most violent in modern Dublin history, which have now led to dystopian censorship attempts. Last week, outside of a primary school, a man in his 50s stabbed 3 young kids and their adult care assistant who was trying to shield them. One 5-year-old little girl was seriously injured, as well as the adult care assistant. The other 2 kids were thankfully spared serious injuries. And the man was then disarmed by 3 men who jumped to the rescue. Then people came around to kick the bastard, and a couple of women then intervened by forming a human circle around him to ensure that the attacker was arrested alive. So then word got out via messaging services like Telegram, WhatsApp, and Signal that the attacker was an illegal immigrant. And word also spread that the kids had been killed. And because word also spread that the attacker was Arab, word then spread that it was a terror attack. So people then encouraged crowds to go protest to make their feelings known. And they used the hashtag #IrelandIsFull. Now, riots then broke out, and the Irish did not hold back. A lot of stuff went up in flames, including a bus with the word "out" painted on it. There were a few hundred people involved in total. Some were holding Irish flags and signs reading "Irish Lives Matter." Some shouted slogans like "Get them out." 34 arrests have been made. 3 cops suffered serious injuries. About a dozen shops and vehicles were destroyed. And now there are calls for social media censorship to stop the spread of misinformation. And there was misinformation, which there oftentimes is, not just from social media, but also from mainstream news and even government officials themselves. But let's go over some of the facts. So the kids did survive, though one is still hospitalized. The attacker is not an illegal immigrant, though he is an immigrant from Algeria. He'd been living in Ireland for 20 years with Irish citizenship for the past 10 of those years. And there's no evidence the attack was terrorism-based. In fact, the attacker is a homeless man, which likely means he has mental problems. So all of this new information did not placate, will all of this, I should say, will this information placate the rioters and those who share the anti-immigration sentiments? Probably not, because the reality for the working class in Ireland is beyond this one incident. They are angry over immigration. And let's watch this clip. This is Gary Kennevy with the National Party of Ireland, which is considered a far-right nationalist party. But he's going to explain some of the grievances that some of the Irish are feeling. Watch this.
We're members of the National Party, and we're here in Ballinasloe, the largest and most important town in East Galway. We are coming to the end of another year, and the struggle intensifies to preserve the Irish nation and true Irish identity. The National Party, which represents thousands of patriotic Irish nationalists, resolutely oppose the relentless ongoing treachery of our contemptible, bought-off political establishment, as that body of traitors ramp up their campaign to make the Irish a minority in their own country in as short a period of time as possible. Their main weapon in the campaign to achieve that aim is by encouraging and promoting mass immigration. This means tens of thousands of foreigners entering this country year after year, uncontrolled, unvetted and unrestricted. It is a lethally dangerous, reckless and downright evil policy that has disastrous consequences for ordinary Irish people with regards to employment opportunities, housing, medical services and educational opportunities, as non-nationals are invariably given priority over Irish people in all these areas. Over the past 18 months or so, Ukrainians make up the majority of the deluge of foreigners who are swamping our small island home, the only real homeland that Irish people have or will ever have. No amount of trouble is too great for our government when it comes to sourcing accommodation for and looking after Ukrainians and other foreign nationals. The feelings and concerns and the wishes of local Irish communities are time and again ridden over roughshod by supposedly our government. Now there are plans for modular homes locally in Poolboy to accommodate a disproportionate number of Ukrainians, despite the fears and concerns of locals. It remains to be seen whether the government will take on board the concerns of locals or whether they will simply override their wishes. Going on previous form, the latter would seem to be the more likely.
Okay, so over the past decade, Ireland took on radical immigration policies that have rapidly changed the demographics, as you heard him talking about. And you know, he's not pointing out Arabs. He's saying Ukrainians actually made up the vast majority of the immigrants, and that is true over the last year. The country has taken in about 1 million immigrants in the past 10 years. And in the last year, they took in way more Ukrainian immigrants per capita than really any other European nation. They took in far more than their fair share per capita, not in the sheer numbers basis. That was still Poland and Germany, but on a per capita basis. Philip Plinkington wrote this in Unheard. Before the riots, many outside of Ireland were unaware of just how radical the Republic's experiment with migration over the past decade has been. The numbers speak for themselves. A full 2.8% of the population is made up of people who have moved to Ireland only in the last year. That is a lot in 1 year. This means that if you walk down the average Irish street, 1 in 35 people will be newcomers to the country who just showed up this year. Okay. While Ireland has been accepting large numbers of migrants for a long time, this was turbocharged by the war in Ukraine. Ireland, whose political and media classes have become notably outward-looking over the past decade, wanted to prove its liberal values and committed to hosting huge numbers of Ukrainian refugees. On a per capita basis, Ireland accepted 6 times more refugees than Britain and made almost no plans for how to accommodate them. The latest numbers show that Ireland's foreign-born population is about 1 million people, about 900 to 1 million people. This means that 18 to 20% of the Irish population is foreign-born. That is a lot. Here in the United States, it's about 15%. In the UK, it's about 15%. In Ireland, for it to be 18 to 20%, that is a very high demographic shift that has happened to Ireland over the last 10 years. He shared this graph in a tweet, but this is where you could kind of see the numbers. The orange is the United Kingdom, how many refugees they've taken in, and the blue is how many Ireland took in. So you can see as a percentage of the total population. So this is on a per capita basis. You can see that Ireland took in far more Ukrainian refugees. When it came to just overall immigration, Ireland had a higher rate of immigration. That would be their government's policies. And their net migration in the blue is just higher than the UK in general. So so Ireland is facing an unprecedented amount of immigration. And this is not something that the people voted on. This is what the people of Ireland are upset about, is that as it is, the economy is, it depends on who you are when it comes to the economy. The economy on paper, you've got Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Janet Yellen saying the economy's great, the economy's great. And then you've got working class people here in this country who are saying, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. Inflation's killing me. I can't fill up my car with gas. I can't put the same food on the table that I used to be able to put on the table. And so the middle class is suffering while the elites, the liberal elites in the country just say, what are you talking about? Everything's fine. And they try to gaslight us into thinking that everything's just fine. That is going on not just here in the United States. That's happening all around Europe. That's happening all around many parts of the world. This is actually happening where government officials are always going to try to sugarcoat things because they don't want to tell you. I mean, what are they going to say? They're going to say, yeah, you're right. It's really bad. It's really bad. And I'm in government. It's my fault. I'm in charge. Shoot. Let me change some things. They never say that. They never say that. they always say, oh, it's not that bad. Everything's great. Look at the numbers. We have a thriving economy. You have Joe Biden coming out there saying, I've made more jobs, after the opening of the economy. I made more jobs than any president since FDR. And it's like, okay, anybody can manipulate the numbers. Anyone can manipulate the statistics, but the people are feeling it at home with their paychecks, their kitchen tables. They're feeling it. They're feeling it on an individual and on a family basis. And these Irish people are feeling it. They're feeling the stress of a piss poor economy just coming out of a pandemic. And now they've taken in all of these immigrants, and they're upset that the people of Ireland are not getting the resources they need to live a better life, but that these immigrants that come in, these refugees, get a bunch of free stuff. And that's fine if your economy is doing well. I think in a booming economy, people are just fine with that. They look at it and they think, well, we need the people. We need the help. We got a booming economy. I need to hire people. I got plenty of jobs. I got plenty of money. Everything's great. But when the economy isn't so great, and when our Western elite powers continue to go around the world waging warfare or provoking warfare, and then those refugees come fleeing in to these European countries and into here in America, but mostly the brunt of it has been taken in by Europe. People are going to take to the streets and they're going to be lighting some stuff up. And that is exactly what they've been doing in Ireland. Here's commentator, this is Kevin Marr on GB News talking about the immigration issues Ireland is dealing with. He also summarizes it pretty well, so watch this.
I mean, Ireland is a bit of a paradox. Economically, it's doing incredibly well. Its tax receipts are overflowing. Jeremy Hunt looks on enviously, I've no doubt. But there are a lot of problems with housing. There are a lot of problems with dilapidation in those traditional communities. As Dougie was mentioning a few minutes ago, that his government has presided over and done very little about. Now, the problem that's taken place really in Ireland in the last decade is that 1 million migrants there or thereabouts have come and settled in Ireland over the last decade. It's been a massive social change very, very quickly, and typically, like in Britain and like lots of other European countries, done without the consent, the electoral consent of the Irish people. And it's created a very big backlash. And you know, quite rightly, as Dougie was pointing out, over the course of the last year or 18 months, there have been a lot of disturbances, there have been a lot of protests, there's been a lot of anger. And on this occasion, it's spilled over into the rioting that we've seen. Now, you know, you have to say immediately that all those people on the streets attacking Irish police officers were not necessarily making a sophisticated political point when they broke into sports shops to nick expensive trainers. But there is an awful lot of frustration there because Ireland is changing very, very rapidly. 20% of its resident population is now foreign born. Now, that is higher than Britain at about 15%, and it is higher even than the United States of America, that great melting pot, at about 14%. The comparator really is Sweden, got exactly the same percentage of its population that's foreign born. You know, and as we can see in Sweden, there are all kinds of social and problems emanating from the communities that have settled there. And Sweden, peaceful Sweden, now has the highest gun murder rate in the European Union.
So the anti-immigration sentiment has been increasing rapidly throughout Europe. We've seen this over the past several years, and we've seen this with the rise of certain leaders who are getting elected or who nearly get elected. In France, we saw the popularity of Marine Le Pen. She skyrocketed in popularity, and she ran on anti-immigration. She actually called for a moratorium on all immigration and wanted to repeal several immigration laws. We also have Italy's prime minister currently elected, Italy's prime minister, Giorgia Meloni. She ran her campaign on curbing immigration. When she got elected, people thought, oh, it's Italy's Marine Le Pen, and this time she won. And the Italians are dealing with a lot of immigration as well. The man who may become the next Dutch prime minister, it depends on if he can form a government. So they do run on a coalition government in the Netherlands, and Geert Wilders. This has been making big news lately. This guy's wild. Look at it. Almost looks like a character right out of a movie, kind of almost out of Hunger Games. You know, he kind of reminds me but in his mind, it is the Hunger Games, I suppose. He ran heavily on a platform that was very anti-immigration, and not just anti-immigration. He makes some pretty he makes some pretty he doesn't hold back. He's I would say he doesn't hold, like, if you think Trump didn't hold back, Gert Wilders really doesn't hold back. He says a lot of very, very harsh, abrasive things, particularly about Muslims, about Islam. He's incredibly against the immigration of Muslims or anybody from a Muslim country in particular, unless they're Christian, I believe. Even then, he actually went on trial at one point about 2011. They actually put him on trial for hate speech. He was found not guilty, but they were using a lot of his rhetoric and saying, "Oh, you were saying these very vile and terrible things about Muslims." And he says if he does become the Dutch prime minister, that he will. He's very pro-Israel. That he will. He believes the Palestinians they belong in Jordan. That Jordan is the Palestinian state, and that he will be moving the embassy to Jerusalem. So he's a very, he's won the election. This was a major upset. He did not get the majority because the way these parliamentary systems work, he got about 22% of the vote, but that was enough to put him in power to be the majority. And if he can form a government, then he'll be the prime minister of the Netherlands. Germany was also heavily criticized for taking in 1 million Syrian refugees. They've since matched that number with 1 million Ukrainian refugees, so they're really bringing people in. Now, Germany has a population crisis, and this is kind of interesting because this is a legitimate concern from the elite powers that be. So one group of people say, why are they doing this? Why are they purposefully immigrating in all of these people, not just to Germany, not just to Ireland, all over Europe? Why are they mixing things up and bringing all these people in and allowing it? A lot of the arguments is because there's a real population crisis in Europe. People are not having enough kids to continue supporting the economy at the rate that the economy needs to be supported. That as people become more educated, as people, as countries become more sophisticated, they tend to have fewer children. And this has now put Europe at potentially in a crisis situation. China has a similar situation because they did a one-child policy, and that is coming back to bite them in the rear end because they got a population of older people who are aging, and they've got people who are my age who are only children, all of them in my generation, and maybe the generation below are all single children. And so they're going to have a population crisis. So that is a legitimate concern. The question is, how do you deal with that? And do you deal with that by importing in or allowing this immigration in from these people that are really coming in under stressful and dire circumstances? So you don't get to select or really, you don't, the immigration process is different for refugees than it is for somebody that just wants to immigrate to America because they have some sort of or anywhere because they have some sort of skill set, or they have, they want to offer something, or they have family there already and they want to kind of immigrate to reunite. It's different in a refugee situation. Obviously, the Syrian refugee crisis, that is because of the Syrian civil war that was very much backed by the United States, very much was a part of that. There's been a major push in the West to oust Assad, and that has created a complete catastrophe. We've seen catastrophe from Libya. We've seen catastrophe from Iraq. So a lot of these countries, the immigrants are flooding into Europe. They're flooding into the United States. They're going, and it's because of war. Now you've got Ukraine. Well, NATO provoked Russia, and certainly it was Russia that invaded Ukraine. They didn't have to do that. It's on them, ultimately, the final choice to pull the trigger, quite literally. But there was a definite provocation by NATO. Had NATO not provoked Russia, maybe there wouldn't be a war. Maybe there wouldn't be all of these millions, 8 million Ukrainian refugees that have been pretty much sprinkled all throughout Europe. So there's something there to consider, and it's a real problem that has to be balanced. You've got a population crisis that's legitimate, and you need to bring people in. But the question is, where do you bring them in from? Then you get into, does Germany, if they were to say, well, we only want white immigrants, that raises some eyebrows because Germany. So there's a lot, it's a very delicate situation and it's difficult. But one thing is for certain, And that is that the questions that these people are bringing forward, the grievances that these people who are taking to the streets are bringing forward are legitimate in that they themselves are not being cared for by their governments. They themselves are falling behind. They themselves are living paycheck to paycheck and are stressing and are not able to live the lives that they envisioned for themselves or even give the lives that they envisioned to their children. And instead, they're seeing the governments give and give and give to foreigners who are flooding into their country, competing for them for jobs, competing with them for housing, competing with them for resources. And it is causing riots, it is causing stress. And so, countries, first of all, the European countries maybe ought to rethink their support of NATO warmongering adventures around, and particularly the Middle East and into Africa. This is causing major crises. So there maybe will be a shift, and we might see that sentiment shift. We are seeing some of that sentiment shift already in Europe, where many of them are starting to wonder, why are we always backing the United States and all of their different their military adventurism around the globe? Why are we supporting this? Because it's only affecting us. We're the ones who have to absorb all of these immigrants, these refugees that are fleeing in from the Middle East and from Africa. Another question is, how long will the EU last? The EU has open borders. People are able to immigrate into Germany, all of those Syrian refugees and those Ukrainian refugees. But then once they establish that they have EU residency, they're able to move around the EU and live anywhere they want in the entire EU, including Ireland. They can go anywhere they want for the most part. There's some countries like the UK, which Brexited out, but we might see an increase in exits from the EU. So I do think we're going to see this. There is definitely a crisis that needs to be solved, a population crisis that needs to be solved. But on the other hand, with the economies the way they are, people just get left behind, and that is not going to work either. And you end up with very angry people.